First, I just want to thank you all for coming tonight and for your practice. The purpose of meditation is to benefit all beings, because when we work on ourselves, when we heal ourselves, and we awaken ourselves, then first we receive some relief from suffering, and then we become a benefit to others. So, really appreciate you putting in the effort. It makes a difference. You could be at home playing video games. Instead, you're in here saving all beings. So, thank you. So, last week we talked a little bit about a Zen master who lived almost 1,000 years ago, named Dogen, who is the teacher who brought brought Zen from China to Japan. He was a Japanese practitioner, and he went to China, received Dharma transmission, and then came back to Japan and founded the Soto school of Zen. And he has this three-part phrase about the purpose of Zen. And so last week we talked about the first part of it, and we're going to continue talking about that today. So the phrase goes like this: to study Zen is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to be enlightened by the 10,000 things. So 10,000 things is a symbol for everything. So a way of thinking of it is, the purpose of Zen is to study yourself. If you do that, you'll forget yourself. If you do that, you'll be enlightened by everything. So that's what Dogen had to offer, almost 1,000 years ago. And it's still true today. But I want to talk a little bit and work on the beginning part, which is the study of the self. So what are we up to here? Because kind of everyone knows, you can pick up any book on Zen and it says, well, Zen teaches that there's no self. I'm like, well, that we do. We do teach that. Well, so then what am I studying? Right? It's like, well, the construction that we all carry around, which is typically quite elaborate, pervasive, and maybe even a little bit pernicious, hard to fully get rid of, is the notion that we do have a solid, separate self. And then not only do we have a separate self, but so does everyone else, right? So, if I'm interacting with Jared, I create a construction of him in my mind, of what I expect him to do and who I expect him to be and how I think he's going to act. And depending on how asleep I am, if he doesn't act in the way that I want him to, I'm going to then think a whole new set of things about the fixed, stuck version of him that I've created in my mind. And so, usually I want people to treat me in a way that reinforces the positive view I have of myself, right? Or sometimes, depending on how mentally ill you are, maybe it's the negative view, right? I want everyone to reinforce the negative view of me. So I want you to make me feel good about me, and I also want you to act like I predict that you will act. And then everything will be fine, and I won't suffer. Just, control myself and everyone else, and I'm good. So, I can tell by the smiles, right? That doesn't actually work. And so, when Dogen is saying study the self, what he's saying is sit on the cushion. When we watch what comes up, right? Really watch it. And then, we know when I say notice it and let it go, right? What does it mean to notice it? Because, sometimes we have thoughts that are like, thinking about dinner, right? Well, there's not much to notice there, right? You notice it, you let it go, you go back to your breath, easy peasy. But, study implies we're actually getting under the hood of what's going on inside, right? Study the thoughts that you have all the time, right? Study the thoughts about yourself that you don't enjoy. Study the fixed, habitual ways of thinking about yourself. What does that mean? It means we allow without attaching, right? So you notice when I think about this person or this life situation, I always feel anxious. Okay, well, let's study that anxiety. Be with it. What is it? What's the fear? Or what's the belief? What's there? Right? The reason meditation needs time, right? The reason we sit for long periods of time is because what we're doing is we're giving enough space that something can come up that's worth studying. Because what we want to do is we want to see through all of that stuff. But we don't want to see through it from the point of view of a belief. It's useless to believe that that stuff within us is fundamentally empty. It doesn't help you. I mean, it's a good principle, I guess, but what helps is to experience that all of the things we carry around are fundamentally empty. All of the perceptions we have about ourselves are empty. All of the perceptions we have about other people are empty. All of it is empty. And so doing that, that's the project, right? And then when we get completely hijacked by something and it feels very real, and like, I grew up in a home that was characterized by a lot of anger. My parents really struggled to get along with each other pretty much every day. And so, as you might imagine, I turned into a person who also struggled with anger because, if you learn negative anger patterns in your family of origin, then you're going to have them yourself. So my Dharma name is Fuso, which translates as no conflict, right? So what does it mean, no conflict, right? It means there's never any conflict. How can I be in conflict with you if you don't exist? There's no you. Who am I in conflict with, right? There's no me and there's no you. Who's fighting? Right? If I see through the nature of reality, what I realize is that whatever you're doing I don't like arises from beginningless karma, going back to the Big Bang, arises from whatever causes and conditions led you to be you in this moment. It's not a fixed self, it's not you, it's just causes and conditions and karma. And my baggage and karma and causes and conditions that are causing me to respond in the way that's creating suffering. So no conflict, right? Right, does that make sense? No conflict. So, so studying the self is allowing the notions of self that exist to come up and investigating them and looking them over carefully and then letting them go. Because if you try to rush it, you end up as one of these people who's like, it's all empty, man. I don't have a self. Like, that doesn't quite work either, right? Now you're just dismissing everything. It's kind of a stoner approach, right? It's all good, bro. Well, no, some of it's hard. Right? You have to work with everything. So, it's funny. Like, I got a call from my Zen teacher today. His name is Dainin Roshi, and he doesn't typically contact me in the middle of the day. And so I answered, and I was, like, what's up? And he was like, my dog died. I was like, what? Because he has like a 6-year-old dog. It's not, he doesn't have a sick dog. And he was like, it's horrible. Like, we were going on a walk today, and like he started acting weird, and he like fell over, and I carried him to the car, and we like ran to the vet, and like I got him to the vet, and he like they tried a bunch of things, and he died. And he's like, and I'm feeling completely like traumatized today. And I'm not trying to be a downer, right? But this is a wonderful, this is a great example. So this is a Zen Roshi who's reaching out to me for support, right? So why, right? Because we study the self, right? We work with what is. And none of us knows what's going to happen tomorrow, right? We walk around like with this idea that we know what tomorrow will bring. And we don't know at all. And sometimes something happens like just out of nowhere, on a Thursday in August. And you're like, ooh, right? And so then what do? Right? We work with that. And we work with what is. Just, and he was talking to me, he's crying on the phone, right? Because what's there? What is that, right? What's being studied? Study is just another word for be with what is. Be with it. The only reason we have to study it is study implies focus, and people don't naturally want to focus on what's inside. After you start to do this for a while, it becomes a habit where it's just natural to, something comes up and you're like, it's not like, well, my dog died today, but I've got work to do and I've got to be brave and it's just a dog and I don't have to work. Do you see all of the constructed ideas there? All of the selfish, not selfish, but self-ish negative-ness of that vibe. You know, you see this at funerals when, you know, humans die too, right? They're so strong, they didn't cry at all, right? Bravo, son. Become another emotionally distant man, right? But no, that's not what is, right? What is whatever the content, you know, when we don't resist what is the content of that moment, which is sometimes surprising and sometimes tragic and sometimes wonderful and joyous. You know, the full range of human life starts to become available, you know, and our band, you know, if you imagine like this is the whole band of human experience, right? If we say, well, I don't want the negative ones, and we start to contract that down, well, unfortunately, there's like a pulley down here somewhere that is attached to the other side. So if I close my experience of the negative, I close my experience of joy as well, right? Suddenly, I'm in this narrow band of numbness that I'm operating out of, and I don't have hardly any joy at all. I don't suffer much, but I don't have any joy either, right? And so when we start to look within, and we start to look at this stuff and say, well, maybe I will look at this difficult stuff. Maybe I will sit with it. Maybe I'll work with a teacher and see if I can get under the hood of some of it and let some of it go. This starts to grow, and our tolerance for, you know, exploring our own challenges expands, but then joy expands too. All of a sudden you look at a flower and you're like, whoa, like that flower is everything. It is, like, holy cow. You know, and not from a, you know, like saying it doesn't reach it, right? It's like, oh, it's a flower, it's the universe. But okay, well, it's kind of lame when you say it. But if you really are sitting and you really are expanding who you are, and you're letting what exists exist and what doesn't exist fall away, right? Then you do have those experiences, those moments. You have them with other people, you have them with flowers, you have them with yourself. You know? And that's not the goal, that's just a side effect of being a real human being, you know, living into our birthright. We all have Buddha nature. We all have this fundamental nature, which is perfect and complete, lacking nothing, shared by all. You already have it. You know, so when your dog dies, cry. When, you know, your loved one comes back after a 2-month trip, you know, kiss and hold them, right? When, you know, someone's difficult at the treatment center, you know, process it with your supervisor. Let it go. Study the self. Ask the question. What is this thing that walks around, this bag of skin walking around, thinking it's a person, thinking it's fixed, thinking it won't change? I think I've got a little bit of age on everybody in this room, and I definitely sometimes have the experience of like looking in the mirror and I'm like, who the hell is that old man? Where did he come from? Don't feel like that guy. You know, I feel like, you know, the 25-year-old version of me sometimes. You know, I don't feel like, you know, all these years have gone by, but then there he is, you know, empty as always. So, thank you for your practice.